Mm. They brought a lawyer to my hospital room. Not flowers, not tears. A lawyer with papers already printed, a pen laid on top like a gift. My own sons. The boys I coached at Little League. The boys I held when their mother died. They stood there in pressed shirts, smelling of cologne, while I could barely lift my hand. They thought I would sign. They thought I would sign. They thought I was finished. But I had already made my calls. And when they came back 2 days later to collect what they believed was theirs, the room was empty. Only an envelope on the pillow. The second my oldest son opened it, he grabbed the wall to keep from falling. Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know. The pain woke me before my eyes did. It started deep in my skull, a slow, grinding pressure, like something inside had been wrung out and left to dry. I didn't know where I was. I heard machines first, a steady rhythm, patient and indifferent, and then the smell hit me. Antiseptic, bleached cotton, the particular coldness of recycled hospital air. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white, marked by a long water stain shaped like a river. Fluorescent light buzzed above me. I turned my head slowly, my neck stiff as old wood, and saw a window. Gray sky beyond it. A bare oak tree. Georgia in late November. My right hand was taped to something, an IV line running up toward a bag of clear fluid. My left hand rested on the sheet, and I flexed the fingers one by one just to confirm they still worked. They did. That felt like a small miracle. I remembered the morning. I remembered standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee mug, watching a cardinal on the back fence. Then something shifted behind my eyes, a heat without flame, a sound without source. I had grabbed the counter. The mug had shattered on the floor, and then the floor came up to meet me. A stroke, I would later learn. Mild, they would call it, as though there is any mild way to have your brain rebel against you. But I had been lucky. My neighbor Ruth had seen my car still in the driveway at noon, had knocked, had found the back door unlocked. She had called 911. Ruth, who I had known for 22 years, who brought me sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving, who had never asked me for a single thing. She had saved my life. My sons did not come. The nurse who checked on me that first evening had a kind face, round and warm, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead like a second set of eyes. Her name tag said, Denise. She moved efficiently, checking my lines, writing numbers on her clipboard. But when I asked her if anyone had called, she paused just long enough for me to understand the answer. Before she gave it, she told me the hospital had contacted both my sons. Marcus, my older one, 41 years old, an operations manager for a logistics company 2 hours north in Atlanta, and then Thomas, 38, who did something in finance I had never fully understood and had stopped asking about. She said both had been reached. She said they were aware of my condition. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. I did not ask any more questions that night. My doctor came the next morning, a younger man named Dr. Reeves, with the unhurried manner of someone who had learned patience the hard way. He sat on the edge of the chair by my bed, rather than standing over me, which I appreciated. He explained what had happened, what the next few weeks would look like, what I needed to monitor, what to avoid. He used plain language. He looked me in the eye. Then he said quietly that he had spoken with my son Marcus the previous afternoon. I waited. He said Marcus had asked how serious it was. Dr. Reeves had told him it was significant, that I was stable, but that the next 48 hours required monitoring, that my being alone was a concern. He said Marcus had listened, asked whether I had insurance, confirmed the hospital name, and then said he would see what he could do. He had not come. He had not called back. Thomas, Dr. Reeves told me, had not answered the second attempt at all. There is a particular kind of silence that settles in your chest when something you already suspected becomes something you can no longer deny. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives and takes up its space, and you understand that the room is different now, that something has been removed that will not be put back. I had spent 38 years building a life in that house on Sycamore Road. Sandra and I had bought it the year Marcus was born, a fixer-upper with a leaking roof and a garden she swore she would make beautiful. She did. Roses along the south fence, hydrangeas by the porch steps. A vegetable patch in the back where she grew tomatoes so good our neighbors would bring jars in August hoping to trade. She had died 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the morning I sat beside her and felt the moment she was gone. After that, I stayed. I kept the garden alive, badly, not the way she had kept it, but alive. I kept working. I had a small accounting practice, built over decades, modest but solid, and I did not retire the way people expected me to, because work was the thing that kept the days from collapsing into one long gray stretch. I had given both my sons their starts, Marcus's down payment on his first condo, Thomas's business school tuition, $42,000 I had not asked him to repay, holiday dinners, birthday checks, a new truck from Marcus when his transmission went, a loan that became a gift that became something neither of us mentioned anymore. I had not done these things expecting repayment. You do not love your children like a ledger. But I had expected, in the quiet way that parents expect things they would never say aloud, that they would show up, that when the moment came, they would be there. They were not there. On the third day I asked Denise for my phone. I had one call I knew I needed to make. Franklin Webb had been my attorney for 19 years, the kind of man who returned calls within the hour and remembered the names of your grandchildren even when you did not have any. I had updated my will after Sandra died and had not touched it since. I had left everything to Marcus and Thomas equally, the house, the savings, the business accounts, the life insurance policy, the simple, assumed arithmetic of a parent's love. Franklin picked up on the second ring. I told him where I was. I told him what had happened. I told him what my sons had and had not done. I spoke quietly, without drama, the way you speak when the drama has already run through you and left something harder in its place. Franklin listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued most about him. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then he said, "Walter, what do you want to do?" I had been thinking about that since the night the nurse paused before answering me. I had stared at the ceiling water stain more hours than I could count. I had thought about Sandra, what she would say, whether she would counsel patience, or whether she, who had loved her sons fiercely but never once been foolish about them, would recognize what I recognized now. I had thought about Ruth, who had walked across the yard and knocked on a door and saved a life simply because she noticed. I had thought about what I had built and what I had meant it to mean and who it would serve. I told Franklin what I wanted. He said he could have the documents drafted and a notary at the hospital the following afternoon. I said that would be fine. I did not sleep much that night, but I was not anxious. I felt strangely the way I had felt the morning Sandra and I signed the papers on the house on Sycamore Road. Like something was beginning, like the ground underfoot had become solid. The notary's name was Patricia. She was brisk and professional and did not ask unnecessary questions, which I appreciated. Franklin walked me through each page. I read everything, as I always had, as Sandra had always insisted upon. Then I signed. My hand was steadier than I expected. After they left, I lay back against a pillow and looked at the window. The oak tree was still there, bare and patient. A small bird landed on one of its upper branches, sat for a moment, and flew off. Marcus arrived the following morning. I heard him before I saw him, his voice in the hallway, that particular compressed authority he had developed somewhere in his 30s, the voice of a man accustomed to being accommodated. He was speaking to someone at the nurse's station, asking questions, using words like situation and arrangements. He came through the door looking the way he always looked when he was managing something, composed, purposeful. His jacket was expensive. He had gotten his mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, a combination that had served him professionally and cost him personally in ways I doubted he fully understood. He stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me with something that might have been relief and might have been assessment. I had learned, over the past several years, that with Marcus these two things had become difficult to separate. "Dad," he said, "how are you feeling?" "Better than I was," I said. He nodded and moved to the chair, sitting with his jacket still buttoned. He asked several questions about my condition, my treatment plan, the doctor's projections. They were reasonable questions, asked in the tone of someone preparing a summary. I answered them. Then he opened his jacket and withdrew a folded set of papers. He set them on the blanket over my legs. He said that he and Thomas had been in touch with an attorney, just to make sure things were in order in case my condition changed, just to be prepared, just so there was clarity around the estate, the house, the accounts. He said it was nothing alarming, just practical. He used the word practical 3 times. He said I would probably want to review them, but that if I felt comfortable, now would be a reasonable time to sign the power of attorney and the amended beneficiary forms, just so everything was protected. I looked at the papers on my legs. I looked at my son. 41 years ago, I had held him in a delivery room in this same city, his eyes swollen shut, his hands no bigger than my thumb. I had driven 40 miles an hour the whole way home because I was terrified of this creature I was now responsible for. I had read to him every night for years. I had coached his baseball team badly but enthusiastically. I had taught him to drive in an empty parking lot, the 2 of us laughing when he lurched over a curb, Sandra watching from a bench pretending not to be nervous. I picked up the papers. I looked them over. The language was precise and clearly drafted by someone competent. It would have transferred management of my accounts, the house and the business, to Marcus immediately, with Thomas as co-beneficiary. It was thorough. It had clearly not been assembled in the past 24 hours. I set the papers down on the bedside table. I said, "Where were you 4 days ago, Marcus?" He adjusted his jacket. He said things had been complicated. He said Atlanta was busy. Work had been demanding. He had been monitoring the situation from a distance. I said, "Dr. Reeves told you I might not make it." He said the doctor had been cautious, which was understandable, but that I was clearly doing well, which was the important thing. I said, "You sent a lawyer before you sent yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was not a fair characterization. I said, "Thomas didn't answer the phone." He said Thomas had been dealing with some things. I said, "I'm not signing these papers, Marcus." His expression shifted in a way I had seen before, the particular recalibration of a man who had expected a transaction to go smoothly and was now adjusting to resistance. He said he understood I was tired, that we could revisit this when I was stronger, that the offer stood. I said, "It won't go the way you're planning." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and said he would check in again tomorrow. He left. The door settled shut behind him. Denise came in a few minutes later to check my vitals and did not comment on the papers still sitting on the bedside table, though I could tell she had noticed them. I picked them up and dropped them in the trash. Thomas came that evening. Where Marcus was compressed, Thomas was loose, his discomfort worn on the outside rather than managed beneath it. He came in already apologetic, already explaining Atlanta traffic, a work deadline. He had meant to call. He was the younger one, still carrying something boyish in his face that I suspected he would carry all his life, and which had made it easy for Sandra and me to be softer with him than we perhaps should have been. That softness had not served him the way we had hoped. He sat down and looked at me with something closer to genuine distress than Marcus had shown. That almost made it worse. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." I said, "I know you are." He said, "Marcus said you wouldn't sign the papers." I said, "That's right." He said he didn't really understand all of it, that Marcus had handled most of the details, that he just wanted to make sure I was okay, that the house and everything was secure. I said, "The house is secure." He looked at me uncertainly. He asked what I meant. I said, "You'll find out." He stayed another 20 minutes. We talked about small things, the way fathers and sons talk when they are navigating around the large thing between them. He asked about my therapy schedule, my medication. He told me about a restaurant he had tried recently. I asked after his work. We did not mention the papers or what had brought him to Atlanta instead of to this hospital 4 days earlier. When he left, he hugged me. I let him. He was still my son. That had not changed. What had changed was my understanding of what that meant and what it did not mean, and what I was no longer willing to arrange my life around. I slept well that night for the first time since I had arrived. Denise was on shift when I was cleared for discharge the following morning. She helped me get my things together, and when I was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed in my own clothes, she stood in the doorway for a moment and said, "You're going to be all right, Mr. Walter." I said I believed she was right. She smiled and said, "Whoever raised you did a good job." I laughed, the first real laugh I had managed since the kitchen floor, and it felt like something loosening. I wrote the letter at the small desk by the window while I waited for my discharge paperwork. The desk had a single drawer and a pen inside it, and a pad of plain white paper with the hospital's name at the top. I had composed the letter in my head over the past 2 nights, so the writing was quick and certain. I addressed it to both of them. I told them I had updated my will. I told them that the house on Sycamore Road had been transferred to the Sandra Merritt Community Foundation, which Franklin and I had established the previous afternoon, named for their mother, structured to fund reading programs at 3 underfunded elementary schools in our county. Because Sandra had taught 3rd grade for 16 years and had believed that a child who could read could go anywhere, I told them the savings in the remaining business accounts had been allocated to the same foundation with a secondary endowment to the local hospice where Sandra had spent her final weeks and where the nurses had treated her with the kind of gentleness that I had never been able to fully repay. I told them they were not in the will. I told them I was not writing this in anger. I had moved through the anger already in the quiet hours of those hospital nights, and what was on the other side of it was something calmer and more certain. I told them that I had loved them and that I still loved them, and that love and inheritance were not the same thing, and I had spent too long confusing one for the other. I told them I hoped they would take care of themselves. I told them that the door was not locked forever, but that what happened next was up to them and not to me. I signed it with my full name, Walter James Merritt. I folded it into the hospital's envelope, wrote both their names on the front, and left it on the pillow. My ride was waiting. Not Marcus, not Thomas. Ruth, who had called 911 the morning the mug shattered on my floor, who had driven 40 minutes to the hospital 2 days after I was admitted, and had sat with me for 3 hours talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. I had called her the morning of my discharge, and she had said, "Be outside at 11. I'll be there." She was there at 10:53. Her car smelled like the pine air freshener she had used for as long as I could remember. She did not ask me how I was feeling. She handed me a paper bag from the bakery on Clement Street and said, "You look like you need a biscuit." I did need a biscuit. We drove through the Georgia morning, the sky pale blue with thin clouds, the trees bare and waiting for spring. I watched the landscape roll past and felt the particular aliveness of someone who has recently been reminded that aliveness is not guaranteed. My phone buzzed when we were 20 minutes from Sycamore Road. "Marcus." I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again. "Thomas." I let that go to voicemail. It buzzed again. "Thomas." I let that go too. 3 minutes later, a text from Marcus. Short, 4 words. "Dad, call me, please." I turned the phone face down on my knee and watched a hawk circling over a bare field off the highway. Ruth glanced over. "You all right?" "Yes," I said. "I think I actually am." When we got to the house, Ruth walked me to the porch and waited while I unlocked the door. The inside smelled closed up, the way a house smells when it has been waiting for you. I walked through each room slowly, not looking for anything, just reacquainting myself. The kitchen, the cracked mug gone. Someone had swept the floor, probably Ruth, who had a key. The living room with Sandra's reading chair still by the window where she had always kept it. The upholstery faded in the particular place where the afternoon sun hit it. The hallway with the photographs, Marcus and Thomas's boys, school pictures in cheap frames, Sandra laughing at a picnic, a photo of the 4 of us at Tybee Island the summer Thomas turned 10, all of us squinting into the same sun. I stood in front of that photograph for a moment. They had been good boys once. Maybe they could find their way back to that. I did not know. I was no longer arranging my life around the question. I went out to the back porch and looked at the garden. Sandra's roses had grown wild over the years under my irregular care, sprawling and a little ragged, but alive. The hydrangeas by the steps were dormant and gray, waiting. The vegetable patch had gone to weeds. I sat down in the porch chair I had bought the summer after she died, the one she had never sat in, and I looked at the bare garden and thought about what I might plant in spring. Not because I had to, not for anyone else, just because it was mine and the ground was still good and things could still grow if you gave them what they needed. Ruth brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat in the other chair, and we sat there for a while without talking, which was one of the things I had always valued about her. After a time, she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "What?" She said, "The way Sandra used to say a garden either teaches you patience or it teaches you nothing at all." I looked out at the rose canes, brown and unruly, full of next year's blooms. I said, she wasn't wrong. Marcus called again that evening. This time I answered. His voice was different. The management tone was gone. What was underneath it was harder to name. Not soft, not quite, but stripped of its certainty, which for Marcus amounted to the same thing. He said he had read the letter. I said I knew. He said he didn't understand. I said, "I think you do, Marcus. I think you've understood for longer than either of us wants to admit." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that this wasn't fair, that he had responsibilities, that I couldn't just erase everything because he had been delayed, that there were 2 sides to every situation. I said, "I'm not erasing you. You're my son, but what I built belongs to what I believe in. And I found out this past week what you believe in. Those are 2 different things." He said, "So that's it?" I said, "The door isn't locked, but I'm not the one who has to walk through it." He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute, then set it on the table beside Sandra's reading chair and picked up the book I had been in the middle of before my kitchen floor interrupted everything. I found my page. The lamp made a warm circle in the room. Outside, the November wind moved through the bare oak in the front yard, and the house settled around me with its familiar sounds, the creak of the 3rd porch board, the tick of the hallway radiator, the small particular life of a place that has held a family for decades and goes on holding its shape long after the family has changed. I had built this. I had meant it for something. Now would be that something. I read until my eyes were heavy, then set the book spine up on the side table and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the house was quiet. Outside, the wind had settled. I thought of Sandra, not with grief the way I used to, but with the simpler warmth of someone who has been well loved and knows it. I thought of Ruth in her house across the yard. I thought of 3rd graders in classrooms who would one day read because someone had decided that mattered. I thought of my son separately, the way you think of people when you still love them and are no longer rescuing them, which is a different kind of love, harder and more honest, and in the long run perhaps the only kind that serves anyone. Then I closed my eyes, and I slept. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, I'd like to hear about it. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Stories matter. Your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Walter, and if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it with them.